Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. That was such a good swing of the arm. I gotta do that again. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. Again, please show your support for my channel by disliking this video. I'm trying to shoot for one of the most disliked channels. Anyway, I really like the dislike finger. Now, sometimes when I'm tempted to give somebody the bird, I've been using dislike in place of that instead. So when I get into road rage situations, when I get into disagreements at work, when I get into disagreements when I'm out in public, I do this when I really mean that these days. I really do, because it's very acceptable to do anywhere, and it gets the message across that you're so upset that you're willing to put a finger up, right? And people know what you mean, right? So it's really nice. Now, I want to say I had one of the best Valentine's days I've ever had today, or actually yesterday. I got accepted at work, and when I went out by myself, I actually got accepted for who I was. So yesterday, I decided to speak up for myself at work, and it went a whole lot better than I had anticipated. So I often get wacky schedules because I tutor so many subjects. I work at a tutoring center, and I'm one of the only people there who can handle the SAT math, AP chemistry, and sometimes computer science. And also, there's a tendency for people to think that I'm more available to go out because even if it's a wacky hour, because I can always rearrange my activities the other times, right? I mean, it's well known that I do bismuth art, right? I often bring stuff there to show the students, and one time I actually showed one of the students some anodization of the bismuth art. I don't think they'll let me bring the bismuth to melt in there because safety issue, but anodization for sure. After I'm done with the crystal, if I'm teaching any chemistry, I'll usually use that as a way to get the kids interested in the chemistry, among other things. I love doing chemistry experiments. Sometimes I get into a little bit of trouble because some of these parents don't have any background. They think it's the most dangerous thing they've ever seen. So I have to watch myself now. Anyway, so I get a schedule that's from 1 to 6, and then an hour from 7 to 8. And I texted my boss this morning because we often don't get the final schedule until the day before. I said, well, it's Valentine's Day. Do you think we could schedule because it was one student from 7 to 8. And I said, can we schedule that one student? And do you know who it is? And my boss told me who it was, and he didn't think we could reschedule. But I knew the student. We had talked about the idea of being single. He had had a difficult breakup with his girlfriend, and I convinced him to work up the courage to go out by himself, and he did. And it was okay. I mean, he didn't say it was the best day of his life, but he was okay with it. So I had a feeling if my boss had picked up the phone and called him, because I don't have the student's contact information, and let him know that, can we reschedule, because I only have one student, it's an isolated hour, it's Valentine's Day, I knew he would be open to it. But my boss had reservations about calling him until I kind of pushed it a little bit. And then he called him, and it was all good. And then I went out to the Gertrude's restaurant at the Desert Botanical Garden, as you guys saw earlier when I was chanting and giving the dislike on the video. And I had a good conversation with people there. They asked me why the dislike, and I said that, well, I like to use dislike as a replacement for the other finger, and they all liked the idea of that. It was all good. Now, unfortunately, years ago, a decade ago, it didn't always go like that. My first time going out alone on Valentine's Day was back in 2011. I had gone to a Japanese steakhouse in Rochester, New York, And the waiter there couldn't wait to get me out of the door. He brings me the check as I'm sitting down, and he's like, "Do you mind paying now so you can get out faster," or something like that. I was 23 years old at the time. I want to say the waiter was around the same age, and I got the impression that he had been alone on Valentine's Day in the past before. And he worried that I would be bitter, not tip him, cause trouble, whatnot, right? And he wanted to head off a problem by getting me out the door so he can get a new customer in here, right? That's the feeling I got, at least. So I tipped him 5 cents because he wanted me out the door. And maybe I shouldn't have done that. I would have given him the dislike finger today if that were the case, right? But that was 12 years ago. Times have really changed. I like to say that one time one of my students at the tutoring center was doing a little survey for his math class. He needed to ask 100 people some question and take averages and all that. And so he decided to ask all of us, when did we meet our spouse and when did we get married? So I told him I met my spouse when I was 0 and I got married when I was 23. But in reality, I've always been solo sexual. I just didn't realize it. When I was in high school, I had a lot of drama with relationships. When I was working on my PhD, I had a girl who took advantage of me, and I almost dropped out of school. So I like to think of the decade between when I was 13 and 23. I sometimes call that my lost decade of romance. And unfortunately, then I had another lost decade where I wasn't really accepted for who I was, right? So the first lost decade was I didn't know who I was. The second one was I wasn't getting accepted for who I am. But the good news is the tide has kind of changed. Now I'm really excited because at the tutoring center we've been looking to hire somebody new, and we interviewed 2 candidates this week, and they all came to observe me teaching. Now the first candidate was a little bit overqualified for what he was doing. He liked the work here, but he probably felt like he could do better. Now the second candidate, which I really love, she is also of the mindset that she doesn't want to get involved in a relationship. And we had talked a little bit after work one day, and now that there's 2 of us, I think it's going to be a lot easier to speak up. And so as I was evaluating her, because she's observing me teaching, I'm supposed to write out the evaluation form. I'm trying to not let that cloud my judgment of her, but you know what? It's kind of hard. I do need an ally at work. It made me realize why some of these subtle judgments can happen. So it was a good learning experience for that. All right, happy Valentine's Day. This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.